Hi, welcome everyone to this session of the Jito Bookathon. Really excited to be having this conversation today with Mr. Nandan Kamath, who is the author of Boundary Lab. Mr. Nandan, he has been associated with the world of sports for quite some time now. He has his own law firm. He has several initiatives which have been quite predominantly focused on Indian sports, Go Sports Foundation, Sport and Society Accelerator in different ways of enriching and enhancing sports in India. I am Shubham Jain, currently based in Cambridge as a doctoral candidate, working on issues of sports governance, equity, and also separately as a sports and human rights consultant. Welcome, Nandan. Great to have you here. I have been sort of working with you on and known you for quite some time now. Had an enriching experience also assisting with you on the book a bit. So it's nice to come back and have this conversation with you about the book and why you wrote it and how it came about. And it has received some fantastic feedback and response in the few months that it has been published. So good to be having this conversation with a bit of some background in mind about how this has been received by several people. So I thought I'll start the conversation with a bit about understanding where you come from and why you wrote this book and how you thought about writing it and what is the process like. I think that'll be helpful for the listeners to know.
No, absolutely. And Shubham, first of all, I think it's a great pleasure to be speaking with you. I think you've been such a large part of this process. This is the book, Boundary Lab. Shubham was a very intrinsic part of researching it and helping me complete it. So I think Shubham knows the book better than anyone else, perhaps even better than me. But Shubham, I think it was sort of the culmination of a lot of different things. I've been very passionate about sport and involving myself in sport. So I felt like through particularly my growing up years and particularly the teenage years, sport gave me so much. It gave me an identity. It gave me opportunities to really interact, build lots of friendships, but also opportunities for personal growth. And as I went through my higher education, in particular as a lawyer, I began to reflect on a lot of this and trying to understand if sport gave me so much, what is its broader potential in society? Because I'm an individual, but what it gave an individual, could it also offer at much sort of more significantly at societal levels? And that was really the thing that has always been at the back of my head. So whether it's my initiatives, whether it's my legal practice, I've always been interested in the public aspects of sport. So how does sport, and even though it's an individual pursuit or a team pursuit, how does it intersect with society? What role does it play? And still, particularly in the Indian context, what are the gaps that remain? So the book is very much a capturing of all of the ideas and thoughts I've had. Many of them experiential, some of them theoretical through my education as a lawyer, but bringing a lot of these ideas together in a way that I felt made sense thematically, but also in some sense inspires the next generation to think about sport in a very different way as a very important part of the public domain. And that's where the quest began, and that's where I hope the quest will continue with the book in other people's hands.
That's really good to know, and I think the sort of springboard for another discussion perhaps there in what you said about using the lens of sport and the idea of sport in understanding society. We've had so many books and discussions over the years about understanding India, understanding society through the lens of culture, through the lens of economic history of India, and so on and so forth. And this is one book that takes a slightly different approach in understanding society and as a different way to sort of, I remember the initial titles of the book, there's a mention of mirror and windows and catalysts, right?
Yes.
So in that sense, how sport shows a mirror to the society and how it also offers a way to view the society. And that also connects with the whole public-private debates that we keep having, and why, even though sports is largely managed privately, why the public needs to be involved and why that becomes important. So we'll appreciate some thoughts on those aspects, I think.
Yeah, so I think those were the three lenses in some sense. Mirror, which just shows you where we are. And I think as sort of a nation, really sport encapsulates the national progress. And you see each decade, India has sort of changed in not only its aspirations, but also its successes. So very early on in our journey as a nation, I don't think sport was a very high priority. I mean, we certainly had the talent, but we didn't have the resources or the institutions. But as in some sense, you look up the sort of the development of a nation, particularly I would say in the last 15 or 20 years, the scale of aspiration, but also the scale of achievement has really transformed. We look at our athletes going to the Olympics, Paralympics, even a World Cup, any sport as genuine potential aspirants as winners, not just as sort of turning up, which I'd say 20, 30 years ago, we were just happy to send a contingent to a lot of these events. And that actually presents an opportunity for frontlining sport as not just a sort of a feel happy about being Indian and identity, but also as an instrument for societal change. So beyond the mirror and the window, which is really about understanding each other and allowing others to understand us, a site for transformation of the way we think about the social and economic transformation of the country, and seeing it as an opportunity which is very rare. These sort of segments don't come very often, these times don't come very often. And my belief is the next 15, 20 years is a massive opportunity to use sport as a tool of empowerment for many, many segments of our country, but just overall to so not just signify our progress, but to actually what I call catalyze it.
And I guess that's fantastic, and perhaps something I would want to unpack a little more in terms of the catalyzing part of it. And I think your new venture on the Sport and Society Accelerator, with its push towards changing Indian sports by 2047, the 100-year anniversary of the independence, is perhaps something to discuss a little more in terms of the various ways in which sports can enable this transformation. So I think it'll be nice to understand and know a bit more about some examples from our history in India or other places in the world where this transformation has already taken place or is taking place. And what do you see the role for sport in not just transforming itself, but transforming other parts of the society for the good, for the positive of the people?
Yeah. So, Shubham, I think in general, when we talk about sport, the picture that comes into mind is often medals and the Indian flag going up and other things like that. So, there's in some sense in the public domain a limited view of what sports' role in our lives are. So, once in 4 years, there's a World Cup, we all think about it. Once in 4 years, there's an Olympics, everyone gets a little excited. But the real issue is the ability of sport to be in our everyday. So, intertwining it in our culture in ways that are intrinsic to the way we live. Why is this important? Because I think there's huge sort of overlaps between sport, health, education. I think sport is an education in and of itself. We underuse it, but also in the broader conversations of how we live our lives and the way we sort of receive feedback from our efforts. I think sport is a wonderful way to show that you put in the effort, you get results, you get physical results, you get other results, but it's also in some ways a safe place to fail. We're in an era where there's sort of very significant negative perceptions around failure and not getting the results we want. But sport, the most inevitable aspect of sport is failure. And there, the opportunities and intersections with building it into an educational framework, building more resilient people, I think those are highly untapped and unexplored elements. And the thrust must be to really embed sport in all of our lives every day. And just not just sport, but physical activity, movement, living active lives. And those active lives are not just physically active lives, but mentally active lives. I think there's a strong correlation between physical activity and mental health. So just bringing it all together and making it relevant to each person. So going back from the public journey and placing it in the individual context. Like I said, I got so much out of that sporting journey, playing cricket, playing hockey, playing football, playing anything I could put my hands on. How do we empower more people to have those experiences, particularly in their youth? And bringing those youth experiences, making them pleasurable, whether you're good or not, keeping them sort of keeping a propensity and a desire and a capability to live an active life throughout. So those early years are the years of ignition. Can we ignite more sporting dreams in those years of youth when our kids are young, but also through teenage years? But keeping the sport alive and healthy. So whether you win at competitive levels or not, you're giving people pleasurable, meaningful, and impactful experiences that keep the sport journey going throughout your life. And there's no reason why at 50, 60, 70 you shouldn't be playing sport. It's just right now we've overlaid this concept of sports excellence on everything we do. So if you're good at sport, you continue sport. If you're not good at sport, you do something else. And I think there's a genuine opportunity to change that with making more sport part of culture, part of the everyday, part of sort of experiential living. And I think that is the real opportunity. And I hope that the book is really a kickoff point for some of those movements.
Uh, Fantastic. That's really lovely to hear. And what I get from there is the fact that it's not just sport should not be just valued and seen as sport itself, but something beyond that, which is physical activity, physical literacy. And this is also something you've worked on before. And the idea that everybody who seems to or wants to play sport or get involved with sports or any kind of movement in that sense should be able to do it from a young age, and not just able to do it but genuinely able to participate, and if they wanted to use sport in whatever way. And I guess this is the point that I get from reading the book as well, that it's about, and you use this line, I think, making meaning out of sport, right? And everybody should have the opportunity and the ability to make meaning in the way that they want to from using this tool of sport in some ways. So if you want to use it just to follow and as a fan, then you should be able to do it, understand how it works, and enjoy it to a level where you can genuinely participate and feel that you have a stake in it. So I think that stakeholder approach is also important, in the sense that even though I might not be one of the 11 players who are playing for India on the field, I still have a stake in the game as a fan, as a coach, as a staff member helping the players train, as somebody who is investing in sport. So in that sense, I think that stakeholder approach becomes important. And I just wanted to know some other sort of thoughts on this and how you are getting different stakeholders involved to help with this journey of making sport more widely available and a tool of meaning making and development.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, Shubham. So I think one of the things we often forget is that the thing that we learn intrinsically, there are two things. One is language and speaking, but the other is playing. It just comes naturally to our lives as we're young. It's probably after sort of eating and sleeping. It's probably the first activity we do, which is play. And at some point, all of us drop off. The drop off happens at different points of time, and we move from participant in play to, in some sense, at best spectator or completely neutral and not even spectator. So my aspiration and goal is to bring more people who are non-participants, not just to spectatorship, but actually continued participation in sport. And participation doesn't always have to be running, playing, jumping. I mean, it can be believing that this is a worthy pursuit, enabling other people to play. It could be sponsoring teams. It could be sort of believing in sport and being an active participant, ideally physically yourself as well, but also an enabler of other people's journeys, and reducing what I would call dropout from sport. There's elite dropout. I mean, not everyone can be an elite athlete, but can we actually elongate journeys of play right through a lifetime? So whether or not you become an Olympian or national team cricketer, can you embed sport into your life? And that notion of converting spectators into participants is really at the heart of this book. But I would love to hear from you, Shivam. I think you were so intrinsically part of this writing process, the research process. What were the new things you learned through this? Any perspectives that changed for you? What did you think were the interesting parts of the book?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you so much. I guess the things that were really important and came out really uniquely to me were, one, this idea that sport is, on in some ways, it's a paradox in the way that it is a part of the society. In that sense, it is like any other activity that we pursue or choose not to pursue. But also there is something special about sport and something unique about sport, in the sense that perhaps there is nothing else that unites us like sport. There's nothing else that unites us in trying to follow a particular person, a particular nation, a particular club, or a team like sport. So that unification angle to sport is, I think, very, very interesting and unique. Uh, Other ways in which sport has this ability to channelize energies in different ways. And you tending to go beyond what you think you're capable of. If you're just playing a match with your friends on a weekday or whatever, you realize that you can go for much longer than you thought you can, right? Because it's whatever, a game is going on, you think you are completely exhausted, but you keep going. So there is that unique thing to sport in that sense, and that is something that is recognized in public policy, in governance, in law as well. And that was something that was very interesting to think about, that this uniqueness of sport is not just present in its inherent nature of sport, but also recognized by the law, in the sense that how private bodies can regulate sport, and the government sort of gives them that leeway to operate, but also exercises certain kind of regulation behind the scenes to ensure that they do not go beyond what they can do. So I think that was one thing that really stood out to me. The second was, I think, the way you have conceptualized each chapter on a specific issue and asking that specific question in each chapter, I thought was very interesting, because that makes it more relatable. The daily examples that we see in day-to-day sports. So the examples that you use of Dhoni, for instance, using the helicopter shot, can he trademark that? Can he protect it? Can he ensure that nobody else is able to play that sport and play the shot? And how that is something that is unique to sport. In a lot of other endeavors, for instance, you can protect your creation in some ways, but perhaps not in sport, and there are good reasons for doing that. Similarly, whether companies or corporates or employers can prevent athletes from going to another club or starting new competitions and so on and so forth. The Dhanraj Pillai example that you give. So I think it was very interesting to think about day-to-day examples that we might have been part of, that we might have seen growing up. The Zahir Khan case, for instance, with his advertisement agency. So many of these examples that are part of our life growing up, seeing them, and then now seeing them through the lens of governance and how society works with them is something I think quite unique to sport. And it was fantastic to have them allocated to different parts of intersecting issues and see how that works in sport and what that tells us about the society and how that interplay happens.
Yeah, no, and I think were the most exciting parts to write. And why Boundary Lab? I believe that it's a unique laboratory sport, really at the front end of lots of the major debates of our time, be it about gender, be it about commerce, be it about values. And to me, that is the real opportunity. And we see it again and again and again, which is very often the unique aspect of sport is that it needs the same rules everywhere in the world, whether you play in Barcelona or Buenos Aires or Bangalore, it's the same rules that apply, which means that sports and its regulations and rules have to make way for anomalies. So, very unusual and exceptional cases, the rules across the world have to be amended or updated in response to changing times. So, my belief is that that intrinsic element of sport makes it at the front end of many of the most significant debates because it pops up in sport very often well before it pops up in society. It could be whether you can wear hijab. I mean, that came up in Karnataka and educational institutions, but 6 years before it was dealt with by the World Basketball Association. Similarly, I mean, you look at the issues about gender, like who is male, who is female. These issues are very alive in sport. And once you decide in sport, that actually sets the tone in many ways. So it's a front end laboratory experiment for many, many different, I would say, battles and contradictions of our time. And I think my theory there is that we have to watch what happens in sport, not only watch, but be vigilant, because lots of those decisions are actually upstream of our society. We often see sport only as mirror and only as window, but it is catalyst because it has that element of changing the way we perceive things, the way we behave, and what happens there has a very strong influence downstream in society. So I don't think we should see it merely as entertainment product which we engage with after just watching it as a sport, but it is a very frontline, universal, global experiment which is ongoing, an ongoing experiment, which is very alive at all points of time. So at no point is a matter resolved forever in sport. And there's lots of different reasons why it's never resolved, because there's so much dynamism, right? The commerce of sport is changing, the science of sport is changing, there's so much medicalization of sport, there's technology. Now we're going to be sort of dealt with a new blow, which is AI. So I call it a blow, call it an advantage. It's going to upend a lot of the ways that we live and work. And in that realm, AI is actually, in some sense, a counter movement to the physicality of sport. So, sport is a human pursuit. How much are you going to allow technology into that human pursuit? Does the human pursuit matter any longer if non-human actors can actually replicate some of those initiatives? And I think a great example is chess. At some point, is chess solved? I mean, there's many arguments along those lines. So, I think sport is going to remain a very front end instrument for how humans interact with change, with newness, with anomaly, with difference. So to me, that was a very interesting theme to try and explore in this book, which also explains its title, which is Boundary Lab, a place where we are testing boundaries all the time. And those boundaries are being pushed and pulled from different directions, but those experiments are ongoing.
Yeah, and I think this conversation about this boundedness and the boundary lab and the experimentation of sport, I think, is always so fantastic and always gives me new ideas and thoughts. And as you were just speaking, I think a couple of reflections on that. One, in the sense of how, as you were saying, these debates are ongoing, right? And these debates keep coming. And I think sport is again a great way to remind us that nothing is as such ever settled. It keeps coming back. So you refer to the hijab example that was resolved by FIFA and FIBA in basketball and football some years ago. But now again, with the Paris Olympics coming up, it's again a very live issue because the rules in France are very different in the notion of whether women can wear the hijab, but a lot of other countries the rules are different. So the question becomes then, and this is also an interesting question, right? Whether a national law or a national policy can go against the policy of IOC, for instance, or any sporting federation, which are supranational, transnational, whatever, like bodies that are private in some nature, but exercise global sort of governance. So the IOC rules allow for that. The FIFA rules allow for that. So the teams participating in the Olympics, and there's a whole movement going on there very, very fiercely by several organizations about asking France to change its policy. So we'll see what happens there. So it's not really settled in that sense. It keeps on going. And same with gender issues. Again, the question that you mentioned, IOC has a certain policy and guidance framework on that. A lot of different countries have adopted some policies. Different sport federations have adopted different policies. So there's this conflict, pull and push there, which becomes interesting. And the other uh, thing that I thought about is also, yes, sport has the same rules everywhere, wherever you are playing, which again makes it one of the very few things that has those universal nature of rules. And that is the point about this pyramid structure of sport that we keep talking about, which is the idea that all competitive professional sport has to work within the same framework, from the international to the regional to the national local level. But also that it's still unique in the sense that it allows for that space of creativity and artistic sort of expression, in the sense that you have to play within the same rules, but then you can choose to exercise your own creativity. So what happened with the Brazilian football team, for instance, they were so creative, and the whole sort of idea of the beautiful game and the samba football, and in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and then that started to change, as you mentioned, with the effects of globalization and professionalization, when a lot of Brazilian footballers started going to the Europe and playing in European leagues, and that somehow got lost somehow. But it was a different creative endeavor, and we see this in cricket as well. The rules are the same, but then pitches are different, the weather conditions are different. So you have to be so creative to tackle each and every pitch and each and every bowler. So even within the same rules, and I think that also makes sports interesting, right? Because of the unpredictability and the uncertainty of it. And so, yeah, any thoughts on those will be very welcome and to hear about from your experience.
Yeah, no, it's all great
Yourself
thoughts.
a player as well.
Yeah, no, I think the amazing thing is to see how much of sport now is part of LinkedIn lessons. So you clearly see that sport has moved from entertainment conversations to business and professional conversations. after any match of any sport, suddenly you'll see a bunch of posts on how someone has come back or someone has returned, and I think that itself shows how much those conversations have increased in our public domain. And I think it's important to continue to see it as public domain that needs to be tended and worked on, right? So it's not something that automatically is going to continue to give us gifts. Like any form of public domain, whether it's a public park or whether it's some resource which all of us use, but not all of us tend to, the more we put in, the more we are able to get back. And we don't take more than we need in some sense. And that is the spirit with which I think we have to all approach sport, because it's an incredibly valuable and meaningful resource. It's like you say, it's a canvas for the beauty of human life, but it's that canvas also needs an element of protection, care, and tending. It's not going to remain a blank canvas to write as you like on, unless there's that sort of genuine effort to maintain it like a public property. And that is really in some sense, the quest. But would love to hear also from you, Shubham, the types of work you're working on your doctorate, the intersections with the book, and perhaps what happened through the process of helping research and work on the book. Any ideas that you got for the type of work you do? Where do you see your work going in the future as well?
Yeah, thank you. And I can, again, what you're saying right now, that reminded me of the idea of limits, right? That yes, sport is unique, sport is a beautiful thing, but then it has its limits, right? So it should not be stretched to the extent that the rubber breaks, the rubber that can give you beautiful moments that breaks, right? So as you were saying, sport needs to be protected and tended. And I think that's where my work lies most broadly, in the area of how good governance frameworks, how the ideas of human rights fit in within the realm of sports. So sport needs to be protected, right? With the commercial incentives and with the big globalization, professionalization, a lot of stakeholders are involved in sports, a lot of big money is involved in sport. And that also gives opportunities for uh, those elements to come out which do not necessarily want good. They might want to use sports for their own corrupt ends, right? So the idea that sport governance needs to be transparent, that it needs to be inclusive, that it needs to be democratic. So those kind of notions are important. It is also important to consider who gets to participate and who gets to make meaning out of sport, right? So, and these are some of the ideas that I sort of gathered while working with you on the book, in the sense of, and this is what my doctorate is also about, in the sense that if someone wants to participate in any way in sport, then they should be able to do it irrespective of where they are born, irrespective of the socioeconomic background that they come from, irrespective of the privilege and the opportunities they enjoyed as a kid. It should not matter that you were born in a place, in a society where you were able to enjoy private training, private coaching, access to resources. Which is why the idea of sports as public good, the sport as a commons, and something that the society and the larger state should provide, becomes important. So it should not matter that I was born in X place to X parents who could not sort of really afford me to put through expensive coaching. Uh, I should have those opportunities. So that is where the work of my doctorate is sort of focused. But also otherwise, when I uh, work in the area of broader sport and human rights. So things like this hijab ban, for instance, is a live issue, whether somebody should be prevented of the opportunity based on their faith, their personal choice, or the idea which we explored and which we discussed in detail about Qatar, for instance, where the construction happened for the football stadiums, and what kind of events do we want to put to, if you are putting these beautiful mega events, can we ignore everything that happens before and after? How sustainable these events should be? Climate change is becoming a big sort of conversation, and in sports as well, the effect of climate crisis on sports, as well as how sports is contributing to that, because we keep flying around the world to these matches, players, as well as fans. So these different debates, and as we see, all of these are live debates in the society, right? Climate crisis, freedom of expression, faith, and so on and so forth. So again, as you said, sport provides a way to look at these debates in an interesting way, in a bounded way, and also sometimes provide solutions, but also sometimes learn from what is happening in the society. And lot of these things I picked up while working on the book as well, right? Because again, there is this diversity of thought and opinion that comes with thinking about these debates from a different angle. Most of the literature in this issue is predominantly European, North American. So an Indian perspective to things, I think, is very valuable to think about how we deal with certain things, or maybe not deal with certain things, and how we can adapt certain things to India, because even though it's universal in some ways, it's also very local and particular in some ways. So I think all those ideas become very important. The value of universalism and the value of particularism at the same time
No,
as
I
well.
think it's fabulous, Shubham. Someone with an interest in public law like you taking some of these themes forward, and I mean that itself to me is a great sort of endorsement for the ideas in the book. In some ways, it's if it inspires more thought, writing, and other things. One of the strands I did want to pick up on is this notion of meritocracy that sport seemingly offers, right? And I think that's a really challenging proposition for many to accept, that sport is actually not, it may have some outcome meritocracy, but process meritocracy, it's very far away from even achieving, which is giving equal opportunities to play, equal opportunities to progress. Very often, I feel we take one athlete who's made it through somehow, used privilege, used other ways to actually anecdotally beat the system in some sense to succeed. And you take that as an example of, look, even someone from this background can make it, but it in some sense annuls the journeys of the average person who actually never stood a chance at all. So the one is taken as the sort of the exemplar of the many. And if you actually dig deeper, I think sport exposes us in many ways. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I think you have a fair bit of work on this theme in particular.
No, thank you so much for that question. I can keep speaking about for an entire hour, but we don't have that time. So I'll try to sort of condense my thoughts. And I guess couple of points there. One is the idea that we seem to think that we are ruled by a meritocratic system where our hard work and our talent is what gets us to the places that we can in terms of educational opportunities, employment opportunities, so on and so forth. But that's not true for generally in life, where you are born, the kind of opportunity, the kind of school you went to, the kind of other extracurricular activities you were exposed to determines your path in life in a certain way. And so there is that qualified meritocracy in some ways, right? It depends on so many other factors than just talent and hard work, right? And that is something that is very important to keep in mind when we think about ideas of inclusion, diversity, affirmative action, reservation, so on and so forth. But sport has been really insular from these debates for quite some time now, because it is believed that the person winning a particular medal or a particular championship really deserves and is the best of the species in some ways, and really deserves to be there. No question against that in some ways. But then we have to see that the person who won the 100-meter gold, for instance, is the best from amongst the participants, right? Amongst those who got that opportunity to run that race. There's so many people who couldn't even dream of running that race because they were not born, or they on into conditions or areas where they could even afford to try that. So in that sense, are we limiting our choices and our pool of the best people to run a particular race? So in that sense, we are doing a disservice to us, to sport in some ways, if we are not giving this opportunity to participate and showcase talent and creativity to the widest pool of people that is possible. So I think those are the ideas. And again, it happens in sports that there is a restricted pool in multiple ways because of so many layers of barriers and privileges. And it same happens in society as well. And I think both these things need to, again, as you're speaking about, feed into each other. But also the idea that sport is not necessarily special in this sense. It reflects a society, but also special in the sense that, again, because we follow sport so much, because it is part of the consciousness in some ways, you look at sport and you realize that yes, if this can be a means to sort of diversify and make things inclusive and really give people opportunities, then this works. We've seen that in case of South African rugby, for instance, after the whole experience of apartheid. Beautiful stories coming from there of people who were able to sort of transform through that. So that is another value of sport in showing that these things are possible. And lastly, I think the idea that often the examples, the outliers are shown as the examples of the system working, but when in fact they are examples of the system not really working. So people who transcend their conditioning and transcend their situations and rise to the top. And again, sport is one of the few fields in which this is possible because of several ways in which sport functions in its own interesting ways. So those outlier stories, in fact, should give us more reason to invest in sport and to make it more equal and spread it out more. Because if somebody, one person from such a vast, underprivileged place could come and do great things, how much can we see more great things if we were able to give those opportunities to so many more?
Couldn't agree with you more, Shubham. I think wonderful sort of, in some sense, a provocation for much, much more. And I think the visibility of sport actually forces us to confront these things. We may close our eyes to them, but they exist everywhere around us. And I think sport can be that place where we actually bravely confront and bring change, and maybe it has impact downstream as well. But more just in sort of concluding our thoughts, Shubham, you read this book, you've taken it forward. I mean, as an author, I would love for as many people as possible to read this book. But who do you think this book sort of hits the right notes with? Who do you think would find it interesting, meaningful? Is one aspect of I would love your thoughts on. But secondly, this book by no means is closing any debates, and the hope is that it provokes and opens up debates. What are the types of public debates you would like to see emerge from this book? I mean, we talk about the autonomy of institutions, to the role of intellectual property, even down to contracts on whether when you have a rain delay in a match, do you get some refund on the ticket? So very practical examples right through. But what are the types of new questions you would like this to provoke? I mean, some of them you are already trying to answer. But in some sense, this genre of writing, what are the issues that are alive? What are more things that can come from this? Because I mean, there's no greater pleasure than if many of these ideas actually take new shape and are taken forward by multiple other people. So that would be an author's aspiration. So two parts to this question.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think the first one, in terms of who should read this, I think everyone, really everyone who is interested in sport, in society, in politics, in economics, anything. Like, this is one of the few books, I think, where you don't really need to be interested in a particular thing to pick up this book. If you are curious, I think this is the book for you, because it combines so many different aspects of anything. Like, if you're interested in any part of the world, any part of the society, any part, whatever you might be doing, you could be an architect, you could be an engineer, you could be uh, an actor, an artist, an athlete, a lawyer, a chartered accountant, whatever. You might be anyone. And I think this book is for you because it gives you a lens to think about India, to lens to think about history, a lens to think about society, economics, politics, everything. Sport is just the lens. It's essentially a book about our identities, what we are and who we are and who can be. So in that sense, I think everybody should pick up this book, no matter what their interest is, as long as you're curious, I think, and everybody should be curious. And I guess in terms of who and what are the new questions that are coming up. So I really like the fact, as I said, every chapter of the book starts with a question, right? So whether Dhoni should own the helicopter shot, for instance, which I think is one of the more most interesting and most relatable, given that India is a cricket-loving nation, questions, and so many of the cricket examples, but so many other sports as well, of course. So I think some of the new question, and the going back to what I love, it's that it doesn't really end with the sense that there is a finite answer to this question. And as you were speaking earlier, these are ongoing debates, right? And I think the book every chapter starts with one question and ends with 10 more, if you read the chapter carefully. So in that sense, I think that's a service that you have done, in the sense that you pick up the book with 10 questions and you end up with 100 or 200 questions. And there could be a doctoral project on all of those in some ways. So for me, some of the most interesting questions are around one, how much the state should play a role in this, in the sense that historically, a lot of private entities have sort of occupied the idea of regulating sport, governing sport, and deciding who the teams are, etc., which is in some ways how sport has developed. So we perhaps need to question that in some ways, given how much commercialization, professionalization, globalization, and public interest that has gotten involved in sport now. If I, as a parent, want to send my child to a local academy, can I rely on the fact that it is safe for my child to go there? Can I ensure that the game that my child would play will not harm them in some ways in the future? If, for instance, these debates are ongoing about concussion in several sports, rugby, football, even cricket. So those kind of things I think are important. What is the role of different institutions, particularly the state, given that state also gets so much from the sport, right? There's it's means of national building, national identity, so on and so forth. So that is one, the role of state and the role of private actors, and also other private actors like sponsors, broadcaster, corporates who invest in sports. So what should be their responsibility? I think this idea of responsibility becomes really important, because as you're talking about, we need to tend this delicate structure of sport and protect it. So that becomes really important. And I guess then the other idea is, obviously sport enjoys a lot of exceptionalisms, so to say, in different ways, in government policy, in legal policy. So how much of that exceptionalism is necessary? uh, and there definitely is some of that exceptionalism that is necessary, but how much of that is not, and how much of that needs to come within a lot more transparency bound and democratic bound endeavors is, I think, really important. And of course, I think some of the newer debates, and I think I'm really interested in the climate question these days. And I mean, we are recording this in June, late June, and India is going through a pretty bad heat wave right now. And uh, and this is affecting sports in a very big way. We might not realize it now, but there is tons of literature on this already, in terms of heat waves, in terms of droughts, in terms of excessive rainfall, extreme weather, so many different things. Uh, India's favorite sport, cricket, is being very, very prominently being affected by it. So many, we wear so much protective equipment that affects the ability of the body to cope up with the heat. Air becomes important. Cricket is so reliant on weather anyway. So I think that is one thing that I'm really, really sort of interested in these days: how much and to what extent this affects sports, how is sport impacting that, and what can sport do about it? And again, what kind of awareness it can build. I think that is one of the biggest questions, because uh, sport has that power, right? So if more and more sort of awareness building can happen, and communication can happen, and education can happen, because it's something that all of us need to do. And I think that is the idea overall in any kind of debate. What we can do about it is I think is important. So this book is not just saying that, oh, this is an issue, perhaps this is a debate. It's also sort of should make you wonder as to what you can do about it in whatever capacity and role that you might perform in the society. So I think that is probably one thing that I like to leave the audience with, but also like to hear your message and what you would like to leave the audience with, and what is your sort of endeavor with what people should do about it.
No, man, wonderful. And Shubham, you helped with the research. I think I should bring you into the marketing of the book as well, with the way you talk about it. But you've also potentially inspired Boundary Lab too. I don't know if I'll have the time to do it. But the message I'd like to leave for the average person is just engage with sport. It has a lot to give you. You may not be able to always choose what sport gives you in return, but there's almost a guaranteed return. Win, lose, whatever you do, sport is intrinsically something that gives you something back. I don't think it always gives you what you wanted to give you. Sport is quite choosy in that respect. But any investment made in sport that is made genuinely and with good spirit, I think gives you something back. And taking that spirit forward, can we have more people participate in that tending, the development, the opportunity creation for others, keeping it as a sort of a well tended public domain? I would like more people to really believe in the role that sport has in our society, believe in its transformative power, and really give it its best shot to play meaningful roles in all of our lives. I mean, and also the lives of our nation. Right, our nation is changing very rapidly. It's going to be very, very important to live healthy, productive lives with intrinsic educational values as well. And I think sport has that ability to deliver in education things like excellence, respect, friendship, give us sort of lasting values. And those are all going to be very important in a long trajectory of our nation as we try and build a systematic sort of institution driven polity where all of us participate as active participants. And like I said, moving away from spectatorship, not just in sport, but in public life. So that's the concluding message I'd like to leave everyone with. Read the book. I would love to hear feedback, comments, criticism as well.
And Nandan, if I can just quickly add one more thing, is just the fact that this is not just an academic and an intellectual conversation or a debate we are having. I mean, there are real practical things that you can do with it. And I guess, Nandan, your current initiatives with the Sport and Society Accelerator is something that people can genuinely and easily get involved with. So just look that up. There's so many things that are happening in terms of research, participation, investment, collaborations at the local level, grassroots level, and so many things that the initiative is doing. So in whatever way you think you could help and get involved actually in reality, in whatever way the book might inspire you, or new things that you have, I think you can practically get involved, and I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I think even just taking whatever your own health seriously, you're actually making a public contribution, right? Even if you do whatever your 10,000 steps or X minutes per day of exercise, you are actually building a nation. You're building yourself, but also building a nation. There could be other movements. Like I think at one point we had each one teach one. But what about each of us enabling the sporting journey of someone else who actually may not be as privileged? So I think there's simple ways of doing that. Others may have the propensity, ability to get involved with the governance of sports or putting your hand up and getting into what I would call public service. Sometimes just turning up, going and watching matches live, showing your interest, and just supporting the commerce of sport. You see a young academy come up, get your kids involved, allow that academy to succeed, spread the word about sort of good coaches. So I think this all of us can play a part in the larger ecosystem of giving more people opportunities to play, but also using the opportunities ourselves. And I think that's the parting thought like to leave people with is get active, and active, not just physically active, but use sport to its maximum potential, because there's lots of gifts around the corner there.
Thank you so much, Nandan. I think that was really great to hear, and we'll love to hear the feedback on the book.
Yeah, thank you, Shubham. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.